Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Haha, I've done it. I'm here with John Burrill, former TMR road rules expert.
Good to be here.
My name is Wendy and I started Get Around Cabo Car Free to advocate for more transport options for people who can't drive. And one of the things that happened when I started Get Around was that people came up to me and asked me about the road rules. What are the road rules? So if you have a question that you would like to ask us about, well, what is the road rule for people walking, riding a bike, scooter, wheelchair? We're not interested in car questions. So if you have a question about who has the right of way, if you're in a car, don't ask us.
You can ask me, but not Wendy.
Yeah, but how would they find you, John? You see, otherwise you might be inundated. So everything we say today is just a bit of our heads up. There's no advertised recommendation, advice, suggestion, something, legal, something. We're here on Gubby Country. We are continuing our investigation into the road rules. It's not really an investigation.
Explanation. Bit of an explanation, isn't it?
And I guess the other thing is that I'm asking questions because I don't know anything about the road rules. I don't know anything about them generally. And it's a long time since I got my license, decades and decades and decades, in another city, in another galaxy, and I've lived all sorts of different places. So I don't know anything at all. Last episode, we were talking about the traffic lights and turn signals. Queensland Road Rules section 63, we are picking up today.
That's right.
I am reading from www.qld.gov.au/transport/safety/fines/cycling. And you're reading from the legislation as well. You're not reading what I'm reading.
Yes, I have opened the actual legislation. The best way to find that is just to do a Google search for Queensland legislation, and it always comes up at the top, goes straight to the government website. Within a few clicks you can get to every single piece of legislation in Queensland, and there are a lot of them. Astonishes people when they actually go on and have a look. There are literally thousands of pieces of legislation.
I went on there to look for about bus pass legislation and bus service provision legislation, and then of course I got completely confused by the language, and some of it hasn't been changed since 1954. I did find out that this just goes to show that we really need to bring all people's use of the road, not just bicycle riders but pedestrians, bus services, because you can't be having the same bus pass legislation from 1954 applicable in 2024.
You probably find that's the date on the legislation, but it would have been amended significantly as time goes by. Amendments are happening all the time.
Let's hope.
Of course.
I am looking for somebody who...
They didn't have go-karts back in...
That's true.
50 years ago.
I am looking for somebody who knows about bus legislation, bus service provision, passes and things like that. So if our listener is one of those, please do contact us through our website. The point is to give everybody who's listening to this a bit of a heads up.
Yeah, that's exactly it, yes.
And sometimes we don't know the answer and we had to write a letter off to the minister.
Oh, we certainly don't know everything.
Certainly don't know anything. That's right.
Everything. We don't know everything.
Well,
we know a few things.
Are you sure? We got a letter back from the Transport and Main Roads because we do have a query and we need further clarity on it. People are people, and then sometimes they work at the TMR, although not you anymore, John.
Yes.
And sometimes they're me and they just have an advocacy group and I don't know anything at all about most things. I remember in a meeting when I was working in a large organisation, I said, it never ceases to astound me, given how often I am wrong, how determined I am to think that I am always right.
Yep.
With that great caveat that I don't know anything and John knows a little bit more than me. Here we go. All right, so today we're doing what are we doing? We're doing traffic lights and turn signals. Disobeying a traffic light stop sign at an intersection with a traffic light's not operating. Section 63, paragraph 2. Fine is $464. 4. Also, failing to give way at a traffic light stop sign at an intersection with traffic lights not operating, section 63-2, $464. Failing to give way as required at an intersection with traffic lights not operating and no traffic light stop sign, section 63, paragraph 3, $463. Anything you would like to jump in there with some wise words about?
Okay. Traffic lights sometimes pack up and stop working. What happens then is you basically treat that intersection as an uncontrolled intersection. What I mean by that is, if you can imagine there are no signs, no lights, no nothing at the intersection. If the lights are just blank, it's as if they're not there. So if it's a T intersection, terminating road gives way to vehicles on the continuing road. If it's a crossroads, you give way to vehicles approaching from the right. That's very basic. The basic give-way rules apply in that situation. The other part that you mentioned there is about this traffic light stop sign. We don't have them in Queensland. Even though we don't actually have them physically, we still have the rule about them. All that is to do with national consistency. It's still in our rules, even though you'll only find them in other states and territories. I know they're pretty prevalent in New South Wales. Not sure about other states, but Queensland, you won't even see them. So you're not likely to get that fine. It would be interesting to see whether there have been any tickets issued under that particular thing. If there is, somebody's made a mistake.
And then, okay, so that raises a question. So, A, how relevant is this for bicycles? Because
I mean, it's the same. It doesn't matter what vehicle you're on. If the traffic lights are out, the giveaway rules apply. If you're coming along, say you're on a terminating road coming up to an intersection, traffic lights are literally just blank, then whatever rules apply for cars would apply for bicycles in that situation. If you're coming up, you have to give way to any vehicles that are coming from the left or the right at that T intersection.
So I was at a function last year. There was a guy who said, yeah, but if I'm going along at 80 kilometres an hour on a road and you've got a couple of old people coming out on a 50 kilometre an hour side road, in this instance, but it could just as easily apply at a traffic intersection. It's no wonder I'm going to T-bone them. Like you do.
I'm entitled to just run people over.
Yeah, well, this is his thing. I interviewed Grant Ennis, which his idea is that the road and car lobby spend a lot of time making sure that individuals are responsible for the way the road rules are used and designed, whereas actually that would be one of Grant's things where it says safety individualism. We blame that guy that I met for his bad behaviour, but actually it's to do with the design of it. So I thought that was an interesting way of doing it. Anything else to add on that one, do you think?
I don't think so. I think the next couple of, if you read those out, they are very similar.
I'll keep going.
Yeah,
so
you go for it.
Failing to give way as required when turning at an intersection with a flashing yellow traffic arrow, section 64, $464. Failing to give way to a pedestrian on a foot crossing with a flashing yellow traffic light, section 65, paragraph 2, $464. Obstructing a pedestrian on a foot crossing with a flashing yellow traffic light, section 65, 2, $464. Passing a vehicle that is stopping to give way at a foot crossing with a flashing yellow traffic light, section 65, paragraph 2, $464.
Okay, sometimes when traffic lights conk out, they don't just go blank, they actually flash yellow. All of them would flash yellow. That is the default situation if there is a fault at the traffic lights. If something goes wrong there, electrical fault or whatever, the default is that the lights flash. Now obviously if there's a power cut in the area, then they're not going to flash at all, they're just going to go blank. This is basically the same rule as when the lights go blank, but the flashing lights, it's just expanding on that issue. Same giveaway rules apply. If the lights are flashing, you just treat it as if the lights aren't there. It turns into an uncontrolled intersection.
I was curious because it says failing to give way to a pedestrian on a foot crossing.
So the foot crossing might not be working, might be working. It depends on the type of foot crossing.
Well, that was my question. It would have to be, if it's got a traffic light, presumably that means that it has the white lines rather than the stripes. Although on a slip road, say you've got an intersection where you've got a slip road and the pedestrian always has right of way on the slip road. That is my understanding from previous conversations.
Yes.
And I have a feeling we haven't actually discussed this on the episodes that we kept, because we did a whole lot of episodes and then we had to throw them out and we had to start again. pedestrians have right of way on a slip road.
Yes.
As if you're going to actually go, it's my right, and have a big 3.5 ton truck come at you. You know. The next one is failing to stop at twin red lights except at level crossings, section 66 paragraph 1, $619. Proceeding contrary to twin red lights after stopping, section 66 paragraph 4, $619. Anything about those two that you think is useful?
Yes, it's interesting in that the twin red lights, we often see them at level crossings, train crossings, but this rule specifically excludes those. So what it's referring to in this rule is sometimes outside of ambulance centres or police stations, you will have a red flashing light, which is different to a standard set of traffic lights. All it is just you've got to stop when the red flashing lights come on because there's a police car or an ambulance or even a fire engine coming out onto the road. It's just a facility to sort of differentiate between a standard traffic light and twin red lights, as they're called, where you've got to stop for these emergency vehicles.
And that's just the bicycle legislation. So that one makes sense that it would be...
Bikes have to stop as well.
Yep.
You don't want to get run over by an ambulance. It's only emergency vehicles.
Yeah. All right. So now we're doing bicycle, bus, taxi or limousine failing to stop at a red B light, section 281, $619. Bicycle, bus, taxi or limousine failing to stop at a yellow B light, section 282, and that's $619. And then bicycle, bus, taxi or limousine stop for red or yellow B light proceeding before a white B light or green traffic light is displayed, section 284, $619. I'm just going to read the last two. Bicycle, bus, taxi or limousine stop before an intersection proceeding before a white B light, green traffic light or white traffic arrow is displayed. Section 286 paragraph 2, $619. Bicycle, bus, taxi or limousine failing to clear an intersection after B lights or traffic arrows change to yellow, red or turn off. Section 286 paragraph 3, $464. Okay, there you go.
B lights.
That's like the bus
Do you know
lane.
Yes, that's right. B lights, a specific light that is applicable to bus lanes. And what you have there is a list of vehicles that are usually allowed in bus lanes. And obviously, cyclists are mentioned by name in those rules. They basically have to obey those B lights. Even if they're turned off for whatever reason, that still qualifies as a bus lane. Whoever would normally have to give way if the lights were operating, it still applies. It's a fascinating one.
You know, last episode I talked about they should use something like the Ausroads classified types of vehicles as opposed to particular vehicles where you've got car and anybody else basically. I mean, I know they say the word bicycle, but basically it means anything else. Now here, if we were to use bicycle, bus, taxi or limousine, if we were to take that Ausroads idea that I was talking about, that you'd get a type of pedestrian, say, or a type of vehicle like pedestrian, type of vehicle like bicycle, a type of vehicle like a scooter, a type of vehicle like a motorised vehicle, a type of vehicle like a taxi or a limousine. How complex would it be to use that in the road rules?
In some cases, there are generic terms that are used to try and capture multiple types of vehicles. Yeah. But I mean, the rules don't go so far as to identify all vulnerable road users. I mean, that would be an interesting concept actually, for the rules to actually specifically talk about vulnerable road users and have a definition of what a vulnerable road user is. And you could create rules that are specific to vulnerable road users, quote unquote. There are individual sets of rules for all of these separate and distinct vulnerable road users. What we're looking at here is rules that fall into that category. It's over the last 10 years or so, it has got a lot more complex with the introduction of rules for motorised scooters and a host of other sort of subgenres of wheeled recreational devices. And it's expanded out and it's become a lot more complex since I was at work. Look at the rules now and think, gee, it's very complicated.
This is what I was thinking about. So if you've got the Ausroads guidance, which is about classifications of different types of vehicle, when it comes to the road rules legislation, whether you could, once the type of vehicle is defined as a pedestrian or it's defined as a scooter, PMD or whatever it is, the first step is to go, what type of vehicle is it? Is it a PMD? Is it a bicycle? Is it a pedestrian, like a skateboard that would fall under pedestrian, presumably? presumably. But it does get nuanced because an electric skateboard, so would that fall under the PMD or would it fall under the pedestrian?
Sometimes both. Take, for instance, a wheeled recreational device. You can have an electric skateboard that is classified as a wheeled recreational device so long as the engine or the little motor is less than 200 watts. They're classed as pedestrians, whereas a bigger motor or a skateboard with a bigger motor, they are not pedestrians. They're something else. They fall under this separate category of personal mobility devices, and they're not classed as pedestrians. So sometimes they are lumped together, sometimes they're not. It's complicated.
Yeah, so what about instead of doing it by, you said watts, how many watts it is, instead by the speed at which it travels, a personal mobility device that goes between 12 kilometres an hour and 20 kilometres an hour, that is travelling at the time of the... So then you end up with these complicated things where you're imagining
that would make it even more complex. Then you would have to have a speed camera there to determine what the speed was going. These devices do often have caps on the speed of the vehicle. But I'll tell you an interesting thing that I have heard. In New South Wales, you can have a foot scooter with a 500 watt electric motor in, whereas in Queensland it's 250 watts. Particularly on the border.
That's one of them going past right now, John.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an old BSA Bantam. That's from the 1960s.
It's probably a complete death
That's
trap.
fantastic. Well, he had a bucket on his head, I think.
You just go, my dad put us on the back of the scooter. We used to have an old Vespa and he used to put me there in my little ballet tutu and then with a skid lid, and you go, yeah, if I come off at that 70 kilometres an hour, that's going to be about as handy as a pocket in a singlet. Anyway, we digress.
We did.
We were talking about 500 in New South Wales and 250.
So, yes, places particularly like the border at the Gold Coast Tweed Heads, you have got a real problem there because you could be riding your 500 watt scooter perfectly legally and then literally cross the road and suddenly you're riding completely illegally and open to a host of different fines.
Presumably quite expensive fines.
Very, very expensive fines. What it becomes in Queensland, that vehicle will be classed as an unregisterable motorbike. In New South Wales, it isn't.
Yeah, we're not really talking here about traffic lights, are we? We pick up with traffic lights and turn signals. This is okay. But so that was a little bonus excerpt for our listener.
One there.
All right, we've got traffic signs and road markings. Before we go on to that, is there anything you want to add about the previous section, traffic lights and turn signals? Anything generic you want to add in there?
I think we've covered it as we've gone through the rules.
Okay, so now we're doing traffic signs and road markings. We'll just start. So disobeying a left turn only sign at an intersection, and that's section 88 paragraph 1, $123. Disobeying a left lane must turn left sign at an intersection, section 88 paragraph 2, $123. Then we've got disobeying a right turn only sign at an intersection, sections 89 paragraph 1, $123. Disobeying a right lane must turn right sign at an intersection, section 89 paragraph 2, $123. Let's stop there. That's 4. Yep.
I think these are fairly self-explanatory. Usually you would have these signs on one-way roads. Not always, but usually you would have them where the T intersection, say at a T intersection where it's a one-way system, you're entering a one-way system, the only turn you can make is left. I think the left lane must turn left sign and the right lane must turn right sign can be on what they call storage lanes. In other words, you're coming up to an intersection, you can move left into a lane where it is an exclusive left turn sign or a left turn situation or an exclusive right turn situation. The interesting thing about these rules is that it includes both road markings and signs. You can have a sign that gives the instruction, a symbol like an arrow on the road also provides that same legislative authority. And of course, it will apply to bicycles as well as
and I was just looking at that and I was thinking about the number of T intersections that I come up to. And say, for instance, you have a left and a right at a T intersection. So you're going to hit a dead end and one turns right, the other one turns left. And say you don't want to be run over and so you're in the right turn in lane, or you want to go left. I'm just wondering, as a bicycle user, how applicable are these fines for somebody who's on a bicycle?
Yeah, it is tricky, because in the situation you just described, you would need to have a measure of boldness in being able to negotiate that right-hand lane on the approach to the intersection. You'd need to be in that right-hand lane to legally make the right turn. You're not allowed to turn right from the left lane if the left lane is left turn only, even if you're on a bicycle. And the only way round that is to get off the road completely and cross the road by some other means up the road a little bit further. You're allowed to cross the road, whether it's at a pedestrian crossing or signalised crossing, depending on the situation. Once you've crossed the road, then you can obviously make your right turn. So there are ways and means of doing it legitimately, but if you're just wanting to stay on the road, then you're coming up to that situation on a bicycle. You need to be left to turn left, right to turn right.
Yeah, I mean, it's another really stupid piece of legislation for bicycle riders. It shouldn't, I mean, it just doesn't make sense for a bicycle rider.
It doesn't, but it's a double-edged sword, I think, because if you're in the left lane and everybody else around you is turning left, and you're there to the left of the vehicles that are turning left, and you want to turn right, that is also a big danger, even though it's probably what a lot of cyclists would like to do. And if there's no other traffic around, they might try and get away with it, but it's still a breach of the law.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine me doing something like that if I was going along there. But yeah, it's pretty terrifying. It just goes to show that the roads are really not designed for anybody who's not in a car, to be honest.
Yep.
All right, so the next one is disobeying a no-turn sign at an intersection, section 90, $123. Disobeying a no-left turn sign, section 91, paragraph 1, $123. Disobeying a no-right turn sign, section 91, paragraph 2, $123. Disobeying a directional arrow on the road at an intersection, section 92, paragraph 1, $123. Disobeying a no overtaking or passing sign, section 93, paragraph 1, $216. Disobeying a no overtaking on bridge sign, section 94, $216. There's a lot of disobeying here.
Signs and road markings, that's how they construct the offence. The one to pull out from there particularly is straight ahead arrow. What that means is that you've got to go straight ahead. Surprise, surprise. So if you're on a bicycle and you're on a road with an arrow that goes straight ahead, you're not allowed to turn left, you're not allowed to turn right. Cars, I think, are pretty compliant in that regard, although not always. I know some intersections where people often disobey that sign. For a cyclist, and I think it depends on the road itself and how it's structured, but is it something that a cyclist needs to do, especially when it comes to a left turn? You know, if you're on a road that signalled the sign you must go straight, and it is a two-way road you're crossing, why can't the cyclist make a left turn? Not doing any harm, but what you will see often is this sign or road marking happens where one-way streets cross. So it would be illegal to turn left into the street because it's a one-way street heading from your left to the right. So, yeah, no overtaking or passing. That needs a little bit of explanation. What it really means is you're not allowed to overtake, which is the traditional passing a vehicle in front of you and getting around in front. But passing is also where you might just be in a completely different lane to that person and you're passing them. You're not actually overtaking them, because when you look at the definition of overtaking, it means you're travelling behind a vehicle and then you're moving out from behind the vehicle, moving to overtake them and then moving back to the left again. That is the definition of overtaking. Passing, you may not be overtaking, but you might be passing. The other meaning of the word passing is vehicles coming in the opposite direction. And that's where this sign applies in many cases where you get a narrow stretch of road, little tiny bridge or whatever. They often use this sign, even though there is a specific sign for bridges, they often use this sign in preference to it. No overtaking or passing. There's a lot of them around. Oftentimes what you'll find is that the traffic heading towards the bridge from one direction has a give way sign. The traffic heading from the other direction doesn't. So there is a prioritisation happens there.
Okay.
Cyclists
have
to abide by that rule.
Yeah, well, you know, and I just like the idea of it, somebody who's on a bicycle who has the priority, and then on the other side of the thing, you know, a car. I can imagine just...
They have to give way.
I know that in theory, but, you know, we were just talking about before we came on air about, you know, general attitudes towards people on bikes and what is that. And I've got this personal theory. I was reflecting on the weekend about what is it that makes the Lycra biker sort of a bit challenging. And I think it's actually the idea that they're so very stooped over and hunched over. It stops the person looking like a human being, which is very upright and erect and very stooped over and bent over and somehow inaccessible in its thing. Whereas when you're riding a bike on a bicycle, you're upright. The other thing that we talked about just before coming on air was a comment that Rod King made. He was saying because of the high level of control that people have inside the vehicle, inside the little cabin, your volume for your music, you can change it, you can listen to a podcast, you can make it warmer, you can make it cooler, you can move the chair back and forward. You know, you have this strong sense of being able to be in quite a lot of physical control inside the vehicle. But compared to that immediate cage of the vehicle, outside that you have no control. Actually, Rod's idea was that there's such a high contrast between the inner experience of being in a vehicle and the outer experience of what happens outside that cage. And it makes the person feel very trapped inside this place of comfort. And that becomes quite discombobulating. I thought that was a very interesting insight. So Rod King is 20s plenty. So feel free to listen to that. Okay, so now we're up to disobeying keep clear markings on the road. Section 96, paragraph 1, $237. Disobeying a road access sign, section 97, paragraph 1, $185. Disobeying a one-way sign, section 98, paragraph 1, $216. Now, I think that is really bad for people on bicycles because Johanna, her episode is now live. I talked with her. She's German, and she said what somebody did in Germany, they got that legislation removed only for bicycles, so that on a one-way street, you could have bicycles going in two directions. Maybe it was Rod King again. No, because if you have cars going in one direction, they can do that. But if it's a small little quiet road and there's enough space, it'd be really good to have bicycles going in both directions. It just makes more sense because the desire line makes much more sense that way. So that would be a great one to get changed.
Yeah, that's good. Oftentimes where you get a one-way street, there's usually some kind of a path there as well. I think that's how it's dealt with mainly here. If you have a bicycle path or even any kind of a path in Queensland, cyclists are allowed on all paths in Queensland unless they're specifically excluded from them. But if there's a path there, then obviously the cyclist can go the two directions. On the road itself is where the rule and the fine would kick in. But yeah, there are ways of dealing with that. Another thing is just to have a road-related area, a shoulder of the road. If you have a shoulder of the road on a one-way street, that allows cyclists to go both directions.
But people will park there. That's the problem. And that causes all sorts of problems. So if you had it definitely needs a bit of shift with the changing use of roads.
Yeah, I think if roads are built properly and bicycles are catered for in the way they should be, the infrastructure should provide a specific environment for them that takes them away from cars. That to me is always should be plan A, separation rather than commingling. That's where a lot of the conflict and the danger applies.
I think it's also the case with going at 50 kilometres an hour on a speed limit on a suburban street. So apparently we're one of the laggards on that one, and globally most places around the world now have 30 kilometres an hour, and New York has just brought all theirs down to 20 miles an hour. So 30 kilometres an hour or 20 miles an hour. Wales is all 20 miles an hour. UK, lots of those places. Europe is mostly 30 kilometres an hour. I think in some states in the US they have that. Others it's not. It does depend, but we are certainly not ahead of the game by any stretch in terms of our legislation for non-car road users. All right. So we have digressed. Disobeying a keep left sign, section 99, paragraph 1, $216. Disobeying a keep right sign, section 99, paragraph 2, $216. Disobeying a no entry sign, section 100, $216. Failing to stop at a handheld stop sign, not at a children's crossing, section 101, paragraph 1, $464. Proceeding contrary to a handheld stop sign, not at a children's crossing, section 101, paragraph 1, $464. $10, driving, riding on a safety ramp or a rester bed, whatever that means, unless necessary for safety. Section 101A, paragraph 1. What is an arrestor bed?
An arrestor bed. I can explain that. If you come down very steep, long main roads, the Toowoomba Range is probably the best example. Come down from the top of it's very steep, a long drive, a lot of heavy vehicles on there. What the arrestor bed is, if the brakes fail on a heavy vehicle and they can't negotiate one of the turns, there is built into the road infrastructure an arrestor bed, which is like an off-ramp. If they lose control, they basically go into this. It's like a huge, great kitty litter place where it kills all the momentum of these huge, heavy trucks coming down steep hills. You don't see them often, but you do see them in that particular situation. And all this is a rule saying you can't take your BMX bike and go play on the bloody arrestor bed.
Okay, and you'd have to be pretty daft to be able to.
You might get a semi-trailer coming and disturbing your peace.
Might be a case of a winner of the Darwin Awards on that one, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Those others, things that you mentioned there, again, all pretty self-explanatory, I think. Handheld stop signs, obviously roadworks, because there are other rules that cover children's crossings, which is why they're excluded on that.
Yep.
You might find a cyclist decide that they want to disobey that rule. Oftentimes you see cyclists can get away with it. There are some benefits because roadworks are usually on roads. Pedestrian facilities are often still there. So a bicycle can actually skip off onto the footpath and continue on. Another thing just to pull out here, there's two rules, one for not stopping, one for stopping and then going. Failing to stop is obviously if you don't stop at all. If you stop and then proceed, you're still committing an offence, albeit a different one.
So that seems pretty straightforward. I think we'll leave it there.
No entry signs are pretty self-explanatory. Disobeying a keep left sign, keep right sign, that's America.
Oh no, I can imagine you might have some weird sort of keep right, on an expressway, but where you would get that.
Very, very seldom.
And for a bicycle.
Yes.
That would just be pretty nuts because you can't. That might be on a motorway, on an expensive way. I call them, not a freeway, an expensive way, because they are very, very expensive in all manner of ways.
I love that. The expensive way. Especially if there's a toll on it.
Yeah, that's some road lobby who's called it a freeway. Yeah, you've got total freedom. Not all right. So, anything else before we wrap up? Because I think we'll call it a day there.
Yeah. No, I think that's fine. I think we've discovered what an arrestor bed is.
I just thought it was made some weird bondage outfit. I'm going, what is that? Thanks,
Good.
John. All right.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you to our listener for listening. Appreciate it. Share the love as much as possible. And if you have your query that you would like to ask us, there's a contact box on the website. Give us a heads up on your question. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.